Good afternoon. So think of this. 300 years ago, Spain lost Florida. Spain lost Florida. Florida, hot, steamy, a wasteland of mangroves and palm trees. Well, today, Florida returns to Spain in the person of Richard Florida. Now, this Richard Florida is hot, steamy, but not a wasteland, creative. That's the word for Richard Florida. So let me introduce today's keynote speaker. Richard Florida is the director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, and he's the Global Research Fellow Professor at New York University. My name is Jerry Hultin. I'm the Senior Presidential Fellow for Innovation at New York University. So Richard and I are colleagues. He's also the founder of the Creative Class Group. He works closely with governments and companies around the world. Richard Florida is perhaps the world's leading urbanist, as close to a household name as is possible to be for an urban theorist in America, according to The Economist. Esquire has included him in its annual list of the best and brightest, and Fast Company dubbed him as an intellectual rock star. And unknown to you, perhaps, but known to me, is he's a fabulous guitarist, so he is a rock star in addition. Florida is the author of several global bestsellers, including the award-winning The Rise of the Creative Class. I'm sure many of you have read that. He's also senior editor for The Atlantic, where he co-founded and serves as the editor-at-large for Atlantic Cities, the world's leading media site devoted to cities and urban affairs. Richard appears regularly on CNN and other news broadcasts and is a regular contributor to the op-ed pages of newspapers and magazines around the world. Time magazine recognizes Richard Florida's Twitter feed as one of the 140 most influential in the world. So with that, let me introduce today's keynote speaker, Richard Florida.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, my colleague, for such a kind introduction. It's always just spectacular to be back here in this magnificent city of Barcelona. You know, I think of all the writing and research and talking I do about, well, not just the smart city, but what I call the creative city. And there really is no place in the world that I can think better reflects this intersection of the creativity of people, from the arts to culture and now technology, combined with a spectacular use of natural amenities, a spectacular waterfront, now renovated and refurbished, not only with hotels and restaurants, but with technology and innovative companies leading this charge to build the smart city and smart metropolis of the future. It's amazing if you think back. My first visit to this city was in 1985, when I was starting off as a professor in Ohio State University. And if you can think about what's been achieved in just this one city in that period of time, it is truly astounding. And the point of fact is, we're just beginning. And that's, of course, why all of us are here. We're just beginning in this shift, this reurbanization, the lifting up of our cities, the return from sprawling suburbs to bustling urban cores, the harnessing of human creative powers, which have always existed in cities over the millennia, but now are clustering and concentrating, in the combination of that with the creation of a whole new world of smart technology, smart machines, and smart infrastructure. You see, we're really dealing with the intersection. No, we're dealing with the coming together of two great revolutions. And that's what I want to talk about today, and help all of us get a little bit more perspective. Take the big picture and try to drive it home. You see, on the one hand, we're going through an economic revolution as we shift from an older, industrial, raw materials-driven, factory-powered economy to a new kind of economy. A smart, knowledge-based, intellectually powered, innovation-driven, creative economy on the one hand, and at the same time, a second coincident revolution, a movement away from the old sprawling, spread out, distributed, suburban metropolitan form to a new wave of reurbanization and the rise once again of density, of clustering, of concentration, and of great cities. It's been a tumultuous time. If I scroll back in my mind's eye, from the first time I visited this great city as a 25 or 26-year-old young professor to now, you think about what's happened in that time, not just here in Barcelona, throughout Europe, North America, the United States, Asia. You think about what's happened to our world economy. Well, in that short time, we've seen our world move from an analog world connected by telephones and radios and televisions to a fully digital world where we are completely and seamlessly connected to one another. The rise of all sorts of new transportation infrastructure, the rise of a global world, of a truly global world where not only capital, but people flow seamlessly across borders. The movement back to cities, the dawn of the knowledge age. But it's been a terribly disruptive time. At the same time that we saw the rise of technology, we saw our technology economy crash several times. A major crash in 2001. We've seen the rise of not only global good guys, but global terrorism, terrorist attacks around the world. We saw a massive economic and financial catastrophe strike our world, from which this city and this country and so many others are still just beginning to recover. You see, the crisis that we have lived through and are now recovering from is not epiphenomenal. No. This isn't your typical business cycle realignment. And you know, if you read the news media, a great wake-up is occurring among our thought leaders. If you read very closely, not only Mr. Bernanke, but our new Fed chair, Ms. Yellen, Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary of the United States, who now is convinced that this is a long, slogging period of recovery. I was just with Larry at the World Knowledge Forum in Korea, where he laid out his thesis about why this recovery will be long. It's not rocket science. And it's not about just the need for reinvestment and re-stimulation and a new role for monetary policy. We are living through one of the greatest economic transformations of all of human history. I call it not a great recession or a great depression, a great reset. We are between two orders. The old industrial, sprawling, highway and car-driven, and I hate to term it dumb, growth model, to a new, we are in that interregnum, that period between when the old order is decaying and the new order is emerging but not fully born. The rise of a new order, a new economic paradigm, a new growth model, which is smart, which is technology-driven, which is innovation-fueled, which is defined by knowledge and creativity, but takes place in clustered and concentrated, in dense and thriving cities and urban areas. That's what the crisis represents. It's not a crisis of financial shenanigans and mortgage-backed securities and all complex financial derivatives. It's a crisis of growth models. An old growth model, a dumb growth model that can't deliver the goods, and the rise, hopefully, through our work together, through your work, in companies and nonprofits, NGOs, academic institutions, in the private sector, to begin to build this new order. Now, in my book, The Great Reset, I was able to go back and look historically at other great periods of crisis and recovery. How do we move from crisis to new order? How do we shuck off the old ways of doing things and begin to grow again? Well, the first thing I discovered is that history in our mind's eye looks short. If you look back at the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s, if you look back before that at the Long Depression and the Great Crisis of the late 19th century, you'll find something quite startling. The way we shift from crisis to recovery, the way we begin to put in effect a new growth model that can drive us out of crisis, is a generational event. It takes on the order of 30 to 40 years to shift from an old economic paradigm to a new one. You know, Paul Krugman and Larry Summers are now talking about we are stuck in an age of secular stagnation. The natural tendency of capitalism, they are arguing in the pages of the Financial Times and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, is mild to modest to extreme depression. Don't believe them. We've heard this before. Just when Keynes was writing in the United Kingdom, the American Keynes, Alvin Hansen, was writing at Harvard. And he argued that the natural state of our economy was secular stagnation. The natural state of capitalism was to stagnate, not to thrive. But of course, we know better. The period of the 1950s and 60s and 70s was the rise of one of the most innovative and productive periods in all of human history. Why? And why did we recover from the secular periods of stagnation before that? Why did we shift from an agricultural society to an industrial society? For 2 or 3 reasons. And they're not the typical suspects. They have nothing to do with monetary policy and fiscal stimulation and the machinations of government policymakers. They are rooted in the fundamental logic of our economies, our urban geographies, and our cities. The first reason was identified by the great economist Joseph Schumpeter. He said that what creates the dynamism of capitalist economies is the rise of new technology. The rise of disruptive new technology that shapes and shifts and puts in motion what he called the great waves of creative destruction that are coincident with the rise of new industries and the transformation and remaking of old industries. It was the rise of electronics and chemicals and steel-making technology and cable car technology and rail technology and subway technology that powered the first great industrial revolution. After the Depression, it was the rise of a new set of technologies, improvements in mass manufacturing, and the rise of auto technologies, more modern electronic technologies, aeronautics technologies that allowed our economy to grow again. The great economic historian, Alexander Field, showed us that the most innovative decade of the 20th century was the exact one that the forebearers of secular stagnation said was the most stagnant. The 1930s were the most innovative decade of the 20th century, and we're beginning to see the uptick in innovation again. Even though people are calling it the drowning out of innovation, the stagnation of our economy. Tyler Cowen, my colleague, the great stagnation. We are now beginning to see the dawn. That's why we're here. Of a new era of technology. You know, the great Brian Arthur, the great economist, talks about everything you are working on here. The smart technologies that will change telecommunications, change the way we commute, change the way we drive, change our homes, change the way we manage our cities. As a second industrial revolution, with productivity implications that go far beyond and are far larger as we make our cities smarter and our infrastructure brighter and more information and technology intensive, that will go far beyond what the dawn of early dumb infrastructure of rails and roads and bridges caused. But there's a second factor that none of my economic colleagues focus on, that no one talks about, that's off the table of the discussions in Washington or Brussels or of the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, the European Union. and it's the reason we're here and we're talking about smart cities. You see, it's not technology alone that powers recovery. Oh, no. It's fundamental shifts in our growth model, fundamental shifts in the way we live, fundamental shifts in our built environment, fundamental shifts in our cities and metropolitan areas. You see, what gave rise to a functioning system of industrial capitalism 100 years ago wasn't just a technology wave. It was the movement of people from the farms into the cities. It was the construction of a new urban way of life. It was our rail technology and our cable car technology and our sewer and water infrastructure and our electrical infrastructure that created the new way of clustering, the new way of bringing people together that generated innovation and productivity, but also created the demand for the new stuff and material coming out of our factories. It wasn't just Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal that powered the way out of Great Depression. It wasn't just a new role of government in the economy. It wasn't just World War II military mobilization that created growth after World War II. It was the rise of a new suburban growth model. The rise of a suburban growth model, the stretching and decentralization of our cities, the highway building, the infrastructure expansion, the new modes of transport and communication, the filling of our homes with television sets and radios and telephones. A new growth model, a new spatial fix, a new way of living, a new geography. As people moved to the outskirts of metropolitan areas, they bought their own homes, rising from 40 to 45 to 50, to in some cases 60 or 70% of our population, depending on which country you live in, being homeowners. They bought cars and televisions and radio sets and stereophonic systems and air conditioning units and washing machines and dryers, powering and creating demand, driving up wages for factory workers, and driving forward the recovery. Now, the reason we're here today, and you might not see it, few people do, it's hard to see a paradigm shift. It's hard to see a fundamental economic transformation when you're living through it. It becomes all so much clearer looking back in history through the mind's eye. You see, the reason we're here is we're living through an even greater economic transformation than both of them. We are living through the greatest economic transformation of all of human history. And let me tell you why. You see, from all of human history before us, that recovery of after the Great Depression and that period, that short period of great growth, creation of a global middle class, at least in the advanced countries. If you even think back to the Industrial Revolution that Adam Smith and David Ricardo and John Locke and Karl Marx wrote about, and if you think back even longer than that, if you cast your gaze back through the millennia, you'll note that for all of human history, wealth was created through a very simple formula. We got wealthy, we grew more productive, we developed thriving communities and societies and ultimately nation states based on our ability to locate around and utilize natural resources and raw materials. Initially, we began to locate in small little settlements around fertile riverbeds and deltas, just as in Barcelona, around natural ports and harbors. And we began to cull and cultivate those raw materials. We began to settle in agricultural towns. We began to trade with one another. And then the great Industrial Revolution hit. And we increased our productivity in ways no one could have imagined. 100, 200, 300-fold. We extended our lifespans, doubling the expectation of human life. We created wondrous wealth and wondrous productivity no one of our forebears could have even dreamed of. But we didn't really change our growth model. We continued to grow, we continued to gain by taking those raw materials, in this case coal and iron ore, water power to create steam, petroleum to create energy. And we took those raw materials and we combined them with what? A massive input of human physical labor. And we organized our economy around giant factory towns, many of them cropping up along those natural harbors and great systems of lakes, on oceanfront communities. We began to build an industrial system which combined raw materials and natural resources with human physical labor. Economists had a simple formula that they told us was the growth formula: land, labor, and capital. If you took land and combined that with physical labor, the backs and brawn and strength of men, immigrants streaming in from the agriculture areas in the United States, streaming in from Europe and the rest of the world, and you combine them with investment in technology, you could achieve growth. That model is broken. For the advanced countries, it no longer holds. The advanced countries are going through and have gone through a shift equivalent to, and I would argue more far-reaching than, the shift from the agricultural system to the Industrial Revolution. By about the middle of the last century, in the advanced countries, Europe, North America, Asia, as we became industrial powers, we continued to produce agricultural goods with a shrinking share of our workforce. Today, in the advanced countries, between 1% and 5% of the workforce works in agriculture. Same thing has happened in industry. In the advanced countries today, perhaps 20% of the workforce, at most, works in the wide range of blue-collar physical industries that once employed nearly all of us. And that's not just manufacturing and direct production in industry. That includes the construction trades and maintenance workers, installation technicians. In the United States today, the country of my birth, or in Canada, where I live part-time, roughly 5% of the workforce is engaged in direct production and manufacturing. Now, our economies did not collapse. We continued to grow and thrive. Why? Because we changed the way we produce. We went through the first economic of the two revolutions I'll talk about today, the economic revolution. We shifted from a manufacturing and industrial economy to something new. Now, many people have talked about this, and I've been fortunate enough to learn and read from many of them. People talked about the rise of a service economy as we shifted from making things to trading services. Others talked about the rise of post-industrialism, a digital age, a technology age, an internet economy, a cybernet economy, an information society. The great Peter Drucker said that we are shifting to a knowledge economy. He got a lot of it right. There is no doubt that the kind of economy we are moving to is information intense, is technology driven, and is powered by knowledge. But there's something deeper than lies even behind our quest for smart technology and smart cities. And that's what I've been able to focus my own research and thinking on. You see, it's not the information we create that powers our economy. It's not the knowledge that is poured into our heads as kids or we accumulate over a lifetime. It's not the technologies that we generate. It's not even the smart technologies that we build that stand at the fundament of this new order. There's something deeper and more basic. The great psychologist Robert Sternberg, he talked about it this way. He said, if you find a great CEO or great technology innovator, a great entrepreneur or a great company manager, a great political leader, a great designer, a great musician or a great artist, and the list goes on, you have found the same kind of person. It's a creative person. But it goes deeper than that. When Marx and the classical economists talked about what powered the old economy, the industrial economy, they said it was physical labor. It was our backs and arms and legs, our physical strength. They argued not only did that power our economy, but it was our physical skill, our artisanal skill, in the small shops of Barcelona or Madrid or in Milan, throughout Germany and in the industrializing quarters of the United States. It was that physical talent that distinguished human beings from other species. But they got that wrong. It's not our physical talent that distinguishes us from other species. It's something far deeper. It's not only something that the great artist and great engineer, great technologist and great CEO, great musician have. It's something that each and every one of us share. It's something you see in every little boy and girl on a playground, in your own kids and grandkids. It's something that each human being has. What differentiates us from other species and what powers our economy is this characteristic we all share, our human creativity. That's the stuff that powers our economy. And that's what's changed. If you scroll back a century in time, most of the people here in Barcelona, throughout the major commercial centers of Europe and North America and Asia, we worked on farms. More than 50% of us were employed in agriculture. A growing number of us were moving to the city, taking up work in those manufacturing and industrial shops and facilities. Less than 5% of us were members of the creative class. Scientists, technologists, entrepreneurs, managers, professionals, technologists, arts, culture, design professionals. By the year 1950, we had become a manufacturing, blue-collar economy. Now 50% or more of us, depending on which country or which city we lived, worked in or around factories. 5 or 10% of us worked on farms. Less than 10% of us worked in the creative economy. Beginning in 1980, the shift begins. Over that time, tens of millions of new jobs are born in the knowledge-based, idea-powered, creative economy. Now, in Spain, a third of the population works in the creative economy. In Canada and the United States, the numbers are about the same. But that's not nearly the top of the distribution. In Singapore, 50%. In the economies of Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and more, 40 to 45%. And in our great cities, in Barcelona and Madrid and Rome and London and New York and San Francisco, Washington, D.C., the list goes on, upwards of 50 or 55, and in some of the districts in those cities, as much as 85 or 95% of the workforce is already engaged in the creative economy. Now, people hear the rise of the creative class, they hear about the creative economy, they hear about the smart city, and they get scared. I come to you from Toronto. You've probably seen a little bit about our mayor, even all the way here in Barcelona. Our mayor is not an epiphenomenon. He's not a crazy guy who walked into office. He's part of the fear and anxiety of people being left behind, being left out, falling further behind, and not just of local Torontonians, but of new immigrants to Canada. You see, we have to go further than just making a privileged creative economy, a knowledge economy, a smart city for the already advantaged. Every single human being is creative. That's our challenge. We have to build systems, smart systems, creative systems, knowledge-driven systems, infrastructure, which appeal to all, and which more than appeal to all, you know, our transportation systems now divide us. In Toronto, the axis of cleavage is the advantaged downtown dwellers who can take advantage of infrastructure and transit and live close to work, and those dispossessed and ever anxious living further and further out in the suburbs who are dependent on a car. It's a geographic cleavage as well as a class cleavage. Every single human being is creative. Creativity requires diversity. It annihilates the social categories of gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, family type that we have imposed on ourselves. You see, I didn't learn about this from studying Bohemian quarters. I didn't learn about this from studying art districts. I didn't learn about this from studying the creative clusters. I learned about this from studying factories. You know, what we are building now, the city itself, has become equivalent to the factory of our time. It is the institutional and infrastructural template and framework that will grow the knowledge economy. Well, way back when I came to my first visit to Barcelona, I was talking about that in 1985. I had moved to Ohio, where my professors had taught me that deindustrialization was taking place. The factories were closing. America and Europe were being deindustrialized as the factories were moving to the south, to Asia, and abroad. I saw steel mill after steel mill close, auto plant after auto plant shutter. But right in the shadow of central Ohio, a new factory was being built, a Japanese transplant factory by Honda. I went to visit that factory to learn why some factories were reindustrializing and others were deindustrializing. I went to visit many more factories in Ohio, and in Pennsylvania, and in Indiana, and Illinois, and the great manufacturing belt of the United States. Oh, I came to Europe. I went through Germany. I went through Eastern Europe. I went through Central Europe. I went through Southern Europe to see the new factories that were emerging right here, outside Barcelona. I went to Asia. And I remember the day, great clarity, in the middle 1980s, when I was standing outside of Nagoya, Japan, in a steel mill. They had taken the process of cold rolling of steel, used in automotive body parts or in your refrigerator and other appliances, and taken it from a 2-week process to a 5-minute process that looked like the creation of a piece of paper in a paper mill. Well, I asked the plant manager, how did you do that? What great scientist, what great research institution, the University of Tokyo, MIT, what great Polytechnic, what great scientist had invented this new technology? And the plant manager told me, Professor Florida, you have it wrong. It's not some great laboratory or technologist that did this. It's not great scientists. He said the factory itself is the living laboratory. This was created on our factory floor by teams of regular workers, factory workers, working in tandem with research scientists and engineers to combine these formally discrete processes into one continuous process. Well, he warned me. He warned me back in 1985. He said, with all due respect, Professor Florida, we in Japan are going to win the automotive revolution. We're going to beat your big three. And I laughed at him. I laughed at him. I thought he was silly. What a silly man, thinking Toyota and Honda and Nissan could tackle our big three of General Motors and Ford and the other one, Chrysler, I think its name was. He said the reason is not because you don't have great workers and you don't have great worker productivity. The reason is the way you manage. You think the key to success is having a high-powered CEO and a great research science group and a phalanx of MBAs. We know better. The key to success lies in harnessing the knowledge and the talent of the factory worker. And then I realized where I heard it first. I heard it from my father. My father's name was Louis Florida. He was born in 1921 in Newark, New Jersey, the son of immigrants from southern Italy to the United States. My dad was a young person, a young boy, when the Great Depression hit. And on the day he turned 13, when he could get working papers in the United States, he left his schoolroom in the 7th grade. He went down to the employment office and he signed up for work, and he went to work in a factory making eyeglasses, Victory Optical, in the great industrial district of Newark, making eyeglasses just like these. My dad worked in that factory until the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. He enlisted in the U.S. Army. He fought in all the great battles throughout Europe. He came back after the war and he took up work in that factory where he worked from age 13 to age 65. When I was a young boy, I used to ask my dad where he worked, what he did for a living. My dad said, I work in a factory so you don't have to. It's your job to get an education, to get ahead, to make yourself better. I wanted to see where my dad worked. I wanted to see why he got dressed up and took an old Chevrolet every morning to his job. And on Saturday, when the plant was running overtime, he would relent. I was 11 or 12 or 13 years old at the time, and he would take me to the factory, an old brick factory complex in the industrial center of Newark, New Jersey. And I love technology. I love technology. To this day, I'm fascinated by it. I would see the machines making the plastic frames like my own, polishing and plating the metal frames like many of you are wearing. And my dad would see me so fascinated by the machines that he told me this when I was a young boy. I since heard it from every great technologist or CEO I met. My dad told me first, he said, Rich, it's not the technology that make this factory great. It's not the machine. It's the knowledge, it's the intelligence, it's the creativity of the people who work here. That's what we have to work on, harnessing that technology of each and every human being. That's what lies at the root of the inequality that we face today. A thriving creative class of all of us, of professionals and technologists and artists and designers, a third of us, 40% of us, half of us, with 50 to 66% of us falling further and further behind. And it's not just level of education that matters here. Creativity doesn't correlate with education. Creativity is in the human spirit. Some of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time were college dropouts. Yes, it is true. 9 in 10 people with a college degree have the great privilege of having a knowledge-based and creative occupation. They're scientists and engineers and professionals. They work in arts and culture. But 4 in 10 people today who are members of the creative class didn't go to college. And we have to expand that. We have to expand that so that every single human being can be part of the equation. We have to upgrade the service work that so many of us depend. The service work, the retail workers, the personal service workers, the healthcare workers, the hotel workers, the food service and accommodation workers. If a creative class member makes 75 or 100,000 USD, a service worker makes 25 or 30, maybe 35,000 USD. The divide is getting larger. You know, my dad told me this. He said, Rich, when I was a young boy, age 13, I had a terrible job. In fact, it took 9 of us. It took your granddad, your grandma, myself, and 6 siblings to make one family wage. He said, when I came back from the war, as if by magic, my job was a good job. I could buy a house, I could buy a car, I could put you 2 boys through college. Fact of the matter is, the manufacturing jobs we pine for, we made good jobs. We have to do it again. We have to take what we know from making manufacturing jobs good jobs, from making knowledge good jobs good jobs. We have to make service work good jobs. You know who has the key to understanding how to make our buildings more efficient? You know where those ideas come from? When we studied high-performance factories, environmental sustainability, when I went to the factory floors of the leading sustainable smart companies in the world, what did I discover? It wasn't just sensor technology and automation that made them more efficient. It wasn't end-of-the-pipe solution. It was empowering factory workers to install drip pans, to develop more efficient and leaner and more sustainable and environmentally factory processes. That janitor who walks around the hallways at night, that janitor who understands which windows are open, which systems can be improved, empowering our service workers, making them work together with technology. That's the key to our future, and to creating better jobs, elevating those jobs, making them creative and knowledge jobs. So we are getting through the first part of the transformation. We're getting through the creative transformation. Yes, it will be a struggle. Yes, we have to upgrade some jobs, but that new economic model is in place. It's the second part of the transformation where we're stymied. If the creative knowledge and smart revolution is pushing its way through the old, decaying rubble of the industrial order, it's the second revolution that's lagging behind. Now that's always the case. What first happens is the underlying economic model changes, the underlying source of productivity and growth and of industry organization changes from agriculture to industry, from simple industry to mass production industry, from industrial systems to smarter technology-driven high-tech digital systems today. It's the second part, the infrastructure system, the way we live part, the geography part. It's the urban part that we're struggling with. And that's what we're all stewards of. You see, the knowledge and creative revolution require a new way of living and a new model of economic organization. In the old industrial system, we could be disaggregated, we could be decentralized, we could put branch plants literally anywhere. And when we decentralized and we built roads and built cars and built homes, it helped to push and prime the pump of the basic economic industrial engine. But what do we know about knowledge and creativity and the idea-based innovation thriving knowledge revolution? It is powered by clustering. The basic force of economic growth behind the knowledge revolution isn't just smart individuals, it is the clustering and concentration of individuals in denser, more tightly packed communities, cities. That is the basic fundament of economic growth. That's what the great Jane Jacobs identified. It's not companies distributed throughout the world with great R&D units to power innovation. It's the clustering of people in places like the Silicon Valley or the Boston-Cambridge area, and I could go on. It's the clustering of people and technology together as we combine and recombine, as our urban metabolism, as the folks at the Santa Fe Institute have shown us, as our urban metabolism speeds up, as we interact and connect. It's the same thing behind a great music scene, a great cultural scene. As musicians and artists watch one another and combine and recombine, they form groups, they create new sounds. That competition and collaboration that occurs through clustering. You see, it's no longer factories that drive growth, it's no longer companies. It's the city itself. The city itself, the smart city, the knowledge city, the learning city, the creative city, call it what you like. It's the city itself that is the production and innovation template of our time. And that's what we're building. By hook and by crook, by trial and error, by work and rework, by combination and recombination, we are trying to figure that out. What is the infrastructure broadly? Not just the transportation infrastructure, not just the telecommunications infrastructure, not just the smart energy. What is the human infrastructure that will drive growth? And the challenging fact is that we've been led down the wrong path. You see, people see the rise of the technology-based, innovation-centered digital age, and they say, oh, that's global. That's global. That's a global age. We're all becoming part of a global society. We're all moving out. The world is becoming more decentralized. The world is flat. The world's flat. The world is a single, homogeneous template where people in industry can plug and play from wherever they are. Call center in the middle of India or the Philippines. Manufacturing taking place in China and Asia. Geography is dead. Distance been overcome. We don't need cities anymore. That's what our pundits tell us. But we're puzzled by the fact that over the course of human history, we just keep urbanizing, don't we? To use the hackneyed, overused, cliche phrase, we went from being, well, 3 or 4% urban a couple of centuries ago to about 10 or 15% urban a century ago, to about 25% urban 50 years ago. Now we're more than 50% urban. 75% of us are going to live in cities and metropolitan areas in the next generation. Billions more of us are rushing. 50 to 100,000 people a day. Urbanizing. What lies at the root of this conundrum? You see, the world isn't flat. The world's spiky. The world is defined by the concentration of economic assets as cities and metropolitan areas grow ever larger. It's not just cities and metropolitan areas, it's what I've come to call the mega region, the great megalopolis. Right here in Barcelona, the area that stretches from this city over to Lyon in France. The area of Amsterdam, Brussels and Antwerp, Boston, New York and Washington, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Cleveland. It's not China that's the great new competitor. It's the concentration of economic activity in Shanghai and Beijing. It's not India that's part of the so-called BRICS economy. It's the concentration of economic assets around Mumbai and Bangalore. 40 megaregions, people. 40 megaregions like this, of which about 9 are in Europe. Ambrusstorp, that area is the number 1. London is quite big. The Barcelona, Lyon, 600 billion in economic assets, 25 billion people. The area around London, over 1 trillion. These 40 megaregions, which house less than 18% of our population, produce 2/3 of our economic output. 2/3 of our economic output, and 9 in 10 of all the world's innovations. That's the infrastructure template we have to start to think about. If the city itself was the birthplace, the organizational template, the infrastructure paradigm, if the great shift from agriculture to the early industrial age, the rise of that city, which used to be a walking city, now with horses and buggies and streetcars, and ultimately cable cars and subways and rail lines, as its borders expanded from less than a mile to a couple of miles to maybe 5 miles, creating a new pattern of more concentrated settlement. After the Depression, the rise of the suburban metropole. The suburban metropole, now extending from the core until a band of suburbs. My wife Ron is here. She's from the greater Detroit area. They couldn't even think up street names. They just named it 2 Mile and 3 Mile and 4 Mile and 5 Mile and 6 Mile and 8 Mile. M&M made that 5 Mile. And 9 Mile and 10 Mile and 11 Mile. They named the roads by the mile markers, all the way out to 20 and 25 plus miles. As that great metropole, now housing 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, 6 million, 10 million. In some cases, 20 or more million. But that's gone. Now we have a new unit, the megalopolis. Jean Gottman coined this in the 1950s, the great economic geographer. And here's where my friends, my great friends in urbanism get this so wrong. And I know you get it right. I know all of you get it right, because you're working on smart cities and smart metropolis. This is not a simple back to the city movement. We don't have enough space in even the largest urban cores. Imagine packing all the people in Barcelona area, never mind Barcelona area, Barcelona into this central core. I don't care how big we make the towers, we can't do it. And in fact, building bigger and bigger towers, building up at some point is as problematic as building out. Oh yes, we know the difficulties of horizontal sprawl when people are disconnected, but what about vertical sprawl? Some of my colleagues in economics say, build more towers, liberalize zoning codes, put everyone in the center. No. Vertical sprawl, when people live in giant towers, eliminates the same kind of serendipity. The kind of density we need is the kind of density you see in this city. It is probably the single best example the world has. Oh, we can talk about Soho and Lower Manhattan. We can talk about pieces of Boston and Cambridge. We can talk about areas of San Francisco. We could go on and on. We can talk about Paris or London. But it'd be hard-pressed to think about an example of not just livable, ecologically friendly, a model of urbanism that is as interactive and is as humanly activating as this very one. And you see it in those Gaudi buildings that line these streets. It is that kind of interactive density. It's not just intensification of the core. We have to transform the whole metropolis. The bigger challenge is not rebuilding our center cities. You know, Alan Ehrenholt, the great urban house, talks about the great inversion, the movement of affluent and talented people in capital to the urban core, and the spread of poverty and dislocation and disadvantage out in the suburb. You see, our biggest challenge is remaking the faltering parts of our new environment. The faltering parts of our new environment are now no longer just in the city, they're in our suburban periphery. But it's not just enough to build up the Barcelona metropole, or the London metropole, or the Tokyo metropole, or the New York metropole, and I could go on, the Paris metropole. We have to build functioning megaregions, and this is a big challenge. As we not only intensify, we have to extensify. This is how economic growth proceeds through all of human history. The intensification of human activity and of land use at the core, and the coincident spread and stretching of boundaries in an integrated, larger city-state. That means massive investment in infrastructure. That means investment in the kinds of transformative infrastructure, well, you've seen it work right here in Spain. The onset not only of great airports and great roadways that are smarter and can be driven better, smart cars, driverless cars, high-speed rail networks that connect disparate parts of an urban environment. And we not only have to do this with technology, we have to empower people. And here's, if I talk to you about the divide that's happening between the socioeconomic classes, between the thriving knowledge class and the falling behind service class, and the need to make our jobs better, our urban areas, our city areas, are giving rise to another kind of divide. We are sorting ourselves by not just our ethnicity or our nationality or our sexual preference, not just by who we vote for, if we're conservative or liberal. We are sorting ourselves by our skills and our abilities. As this basic clustering force drives so many of us to locate near other productive people. That's at the bottom of it. As we locate around other productive people, we spur innovation and productivity. We are getting clusters of advantage and clusters of disadvantage, side by side. Now, in Toronto, what that resulted in was a dysfunctional, incompetent mayor. In London, it's erupted in riots. And it's not the only city that has seen riots. Many more have seen this kind of rioting, and it will continue. As I wrote in Rise of the Creative Class, it is not the factory that's the source of class struggle in our time. It's the city itself. It's the city itself. Its place has become the core organizing unit of our economy. It's also become the site of increased struggle for economic advantage. And one thing we know, if you're born into an advantaged clustered part of our metropolis and megaregion, your chances of success are great. And if you're born into a less advantaged part of that metropolis, into an area of poverty, your chances of success. I'm the product of a working class household. My dad had a 7th grade education. No one in my family went to college. I grew up in a working class district, yet I could get a scholarship from my state, New Jersey, and go to our state university. That doesn't happen anymore. Those advantages are built into the nature of our places. So as we work on smart cities, we have to work on cities that not only improve our transportation and communications mobility, but our socioeconomic mobility. Every single human being is creative. And that leaves me with one additional challenge. As we go about our work to building smarter, better, more intelligent, less congested, cities that work, more ecologically friendly. You know, our factories have eliminated waste, haven't they? Many of you come from engineering backgrounds. I've studied factories. They run 24/7 with virtually no waste. In fact, most things used in the factory today are recycled. The full use of human talents and the full use of raw materials and recycling of them. Our cities are giant waste machines. They are giant, Mura, giant waste machines. Lights on all night, parking spaces and cars unused, transportation systems sub-optimized, and the list goes on. Homes that are in many of these cities, occupied by the plutocracy, left vacant 50 or 51 weeks of the year. Could you run a factory like that? Our cities have become giant waste-generating systems. So the first thing is that we have to attack the last frontier of waste. If we've annihilated it in our factories, if we've taken it on in our knowledge work institutions, we have to make our cities run efficiently. But in addition to that challenge, which I know you can address, here's one additional one. We have to make our cities more livable places. We can't just make our cities more productive and more business-like places, although that is what's at the bottom of this economic logic. We have to make our cities more livable places. One thing I've learned in my own research is that the greatest cities thrive on what I call the 3 T's of economic growth. The first T we all understand in this room. A great city, a great metropolitan area, a great megaregion has to be a technology leader. It has to have advanced technology. It has to use advanced technology. It has to have the most advanced technology infrastructure. It has to have great research and development institutions, great research universities. Look at what we're doing in New York City to attract, that's why Jerry and I are colleagues, to attract the best and brightest in engineering to a city of finance and media and industry. But technology alone will not power this revolution. You know how I know that? I lived for nearly 20 years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city that was on the frontier of technology along with my wife's hometown, Detroit. Cities that were at the cutting edge, the Silicon Valleys of their time. The Silicon Valleys of their time. Only to see that technology and industry move away. Because technology is mobile. What I found out when I was teaching in Pittsburgh is even the patents we created, innovations we created in Pittsburgh, were being more used in the Silicon Valley or Tokyo than they were in the hometown of Pittsburgh. The second T is talent. Talent. A great city has to be a generator of talent. It has to be a place that creates talent, that nurtures talent, that has great education, that develops creative faculties in human beings, that harnesses that creativity. The unfortunate thing is that talent, too, can move. I used to say in Pittsburgh, our greatest export wasn't steel, it was our talented and creative people. You've seen that in your own towns. as people who are educated in one area move to another. And that leads me to the third T, tolerance. A place that is open-minded and diverse, that welcomes the creative talents of all, that doesn't care what race or ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation, that can harness that creative impetus, technology, talent, and tolerance, and it comes together in a city. So while we're working on smarter cities and more technology-driven cities and cities, automated cities, cities with better sensors, we have to work on the second dimension, quality of place. No amount of smart technology is going to make another Barcelona, is it? There is a place that we're all in that exemplifies quality of place, not quality of life. It's not quality of life we're talking about. It is quality of place. That's what drives this conurbation of technology and talent, of industry and people. As people have choice, the most mobile people that have ever come to my classroom at NYU or the University of Toronto, I have kids from all over the world. When I teach my January term course in Abu Dhabi, I had one American, two Europeans, kids from Latin America, from Asia, from all over the world coming together as part of one global classroom, attracted to their peers and colleagues. And when they graduate, they're attracted to quality of place. I probe these kids all the time. They are attracted from all over the world, not just to a job, but a place that has a quality of place. Not just a job, but a thick labor market. Because there are very few people who have the great good fortune my father had of one job for life. Most people today switch jobs and want to live in a city or a community that have many economic opportunities for them and their significant other or spouse, a thick labor market. But not only that, they want to live in a city that's exciting. You know, when I ask my students, they tell me they want to live in a city that has energy, and it's not cheap gas and electricity. They mean a buzz, a cultural feel, a vibe. You know what they're really getting at? Is a city of opportunity. Not just a city of nightlife and fun. When you go to a city and you see vibrancy, and you see animated street life, and you see people of all ages and colors and ethnicities and sexual orientations, that's a signal that a city is not only a fun place to be, it's a city of opportunity for me. I can go to that city and fit in. I can go to that city and be part of the mix. I can go to that city and be successful. Quality of place. And here are the dimensions we have to work on, and we can't harm. In our work, we certainly have to say, do no harm. First, what's there? The most important element of our cities is the great history they reflect. Look around this one. It is that texture of historic and modern buildings. It's the authenticity that comes with the built and natural environment, to preserve that, to nurture that, to take our greatest care to make sure it thrives. What's there? Who's there? The mix of people that I talked about, the energy of human beings' interaction, that street-level vibe, and then what's going on? What's going on? What is the mix of activities? Not just the city and day. The city and day is important. The city of production and industry, but the city at night. And the city at night is just not a playground. It's a city of industry and innovation. When my students studied the city at night in London or New York, what they found was a city of interaction, a city of networking, a city of connection making, a city of information sharing that goes on within and beyond the workplace. In fact, the way the city spurs innovation is not through the direct office or workplace, but in those serendipitous interactions that occur. Well, everyone is very kind to have a lovely counter in front of me, and I can see by my watch that we're just about out of time. And, well, I'm a professor, which means with all respects, it means I come from the Fidel Castro School of Public Speaking, which means I could keep you here all night. But I want to end on a story that I hope, will give you a sense of how this creative, smart, knowledge-driven, this creative economy, it cuts across divides and social categories that don't matter anymore. That you never know where that in the cities we're building, you never know where that creative spark can come from. Well, it must have been almost 15 or 20 years ago now. I was I was invited to Seattle, Washington to meet with the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce. And I was helping them fashion a program to revitalize their urban core. Now, it is quite lovely now, but at that point, it was quite dilapidated. There was outside of the central business area with the office areas, there was homelessness, there was blight, a lot of boarded up buildings. And I saw coffee houses, and I saw some art galleries, and a couple of other things. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a new building being constructed. It was being built by, well, I guess it's America's Gaudi, Frank Gehry. Canada's Gaudi. He's a Canadian by birth. And I thought to myself, what could this new building that was being built in the urban center of Seattle, what could it be? So I asked my host, I asked the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce, I said, what is this new building that is being built right in your downtown center? Why? They said, oh, that's what a fellow named Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates, one of the richest billionaires in the world, that's what he was giving back. He was born in Seattle. He was giving this back to his hometown. So I said to myself, well, what could it be? It must be a Seattle Science Center, of course. Science, that's what motivated Paul Allen. He's a great scientist. He's a computer scientist. He writes computer code. He must be reflecting that in the creation of a new Seattle Center for Science. No, my host said, that's not what it is. I said, no, okay, I'm smarter than that. It's not physics or mathematics that motivated Paul Allen. He's a technologist. He's an inventor. The Seattle Discovery Center. That's what it must be. A place that really represents the kind of Thomas Edison's, the Paul Allens, the great inventors. No. I said to myself, well, this guy's worth $30 or $40 billion. It's got to be the center for how to get rich by being an entrepreneurial capitalist, how to teach kids in Seattle how to make a lot of money and power the economy. No. Jerry was very kind to tell you that I'm a guitar player. That was my identity for the first 25 years of my life, before, like Bill Clinton, decided he wasn't going to be John Coltrane as a saxophonist. I realized I couldn't cut it in music, so I turned to academia. It's the Jimi Hendrix Experience music project. You see, it wasn't the scientist, it wasn't the technologist, it wasn't the great entrepreneur that motivated Paul Allen, arguably one of the greatest scientists and technologists and entrepreneurs of our age. It was a young black American named Jimi Hendrix who grew up in a broken home. His mother died at 27, the same age he would die. A young black American who found a guitar and learned blues and rhythm blues and soul, moved to England and formed a band, and not only changed the way he played music, he was a technology innovator. He worked with Jim Marshall and Leo Fender to make new amplifiers. He worked on those pedals, wah-wah pedals and fuzz pedals and echo pedals. And when he got enough money, you know what he did with it? He built his own high-tech startup called Electric Ladyland Studios. He built his own startups where he took the recording studio booths from behind the glass wall, where the engineers controlled them, and he put them out around sofas and comfortable chairs where those whose skill and creativity were the means of production, the musicians, and that's why we have Jimi Hendrix music to this day, that comes out of his great technology startup. We are at the dawn of two great revolutions, a creative revolution and an urban revolution. It's our jobs together to make those work, to make cities and communities that are not only smart and technology-driven, but where the knowledge and the intelligence and all of our creativity can thrive. Thank you very much for listening to me.